Welcome to USC Primetime Live, the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football. We're presented by FanDuel, and it's Matt Zemek with Crashlet Collier and Nolan Ezett. And, look, we have a long off season, right? Lots to talk about with USC football, the roster, the coaching staff, and all that. This is a week for us to talk about USC and the NFL, right? Because Sam Darnold becomes the first USC quarterback to not only start in a Super Bowl, but win the Super Bowl. The Seattle Seahawks take care of the New England Patriots in Super Bowl 60. A momentous occasion for Sam Darnold, for USC football. Of course, Uchenna Nwosu, Leonard Williams, Brandon Peely, also former Trojans on the Seattle Seahawks winning, but really Sam Darnold as quarterback. It took 60 years for USC quarterback to start and win a Super Bowl. That's a really big deal. So that is certainly the highlight of our show this week on the USC channel. So Crash and then Nolan, your reactions to this very, very big and special USC football story in the NFL.
So Matt, I think it's huge for not just obviously for Sam Darnold and the Seahawks, obviously the whole USC football program, but I think just the Trojan family in general. And especially you just look at the way Sam Darnold came into USC, where he was kind of really, took over after, Max Brown was struggling. And that's another thing I'll get into in a sec, is how Max Brown has, been talking about Sam Darnold in the past couple weeks leading up to the Super Bowl. But I think also just how Darnold, got USC, won the Rose Bowl, and then, really just, just his journey to getting to where he was, where it looked like he might have, looking like he might have been washed up. It was kind of, looking like he was going to be trending towards maybe not really amounting to much in the NFL. But then, he gets that opportunity with Minnesota last year. Obviously, they decide not to retain him. He goes to Seattle and just does such a great job. So it's super great to see a guy who just, persevered through so much. And I think why I want to circle back to Max Brown is the way he just even just how just, he and Sam both handled the situation, just how open he's been about that whole situation, about just what it meant, and just how now even still, you can tell Max Brown is proud of Sam Darnold. So I think it's just a really cool story of just how Sam Darnold, kind of persevered through a lot to get to that point. But then also I think it was interesting too, that it's well, obviously, Darnold was the first USC quarterback to start at quarterback. A lot of people assume that he was the first quarterback to ever make it. And I thought that was an interesting thing that I saw USC put out. And actually, he's the first. Willie Woods was the first quarterback, but he started at a safety. He wasn't at quarterback. So for Darnold to do it, be the first USC quarterback to start as a quarterback and win the Super Bowl, I think it's just super great just for the entire Trojan family, and a huge just, really, obviously happy for the other guys, but especially for Darnold, like I said, for all he persevered through.
Nolan.
Sorry, I broke up there for a sec. Didn't hear the last couple things you had to say, Crash. But just kind of to piggyback off of especially what you were saying a second ago. I mean, this is, in my memory, the best Super Bowl for USC, and I don't want to say history, but in my time. You're not just talking about Sam Darnold, but you're also talking about three other guys, some of whom we're going to get to. I mean, 4 Trojans winning the Super Bowl, some of whom had huge impacts beyond the quarterback position. I mean, you talk about a pick 6 Trojan, and then you got your Trojan quarterback being the first USC quarterback to win the whole thing. That's just awesome to me. It's a great thing for the brand. And I genuinely think, I'm not saying that that's going to have a true impact on recruiting, but it could. I mean, USC is all over the news now. The one thing that USC hadn't done 60 years, right? Win a Super Bowl or have a Super Bowl winning quarterback. That's the one thing USC hadn't done. USC is known to have amazing running backs through and through, especially in the Pete Carroll era. But even now, there's always a good running back on this team. Sort of wide receiver defense, that's been the weakness for a little bit. But for a while, USC has had some great defenses and has had some great defensive players. The one thing, it's just the quarterback position. It's the most important player on the field. And now USC has got Sam Darnold winning a Super Bowl, and USC's also got another great quarterback in the league, and that could have a impact on recruiting. I know that's looking far ahead, but I think that's important to note.
Yeah, no, I mean, there are a lot of USC angles attached to this story. So, we'll circle back to Darnold. There's plenty more to say about him, but, Uchenna Nwosu, not only does he make the play that really put away this game, sealed the win for the Seahawks, but you can draw a clear connection to Malcolm Smith. All right. So fun times here on the ranch. Internet interruptions prevailing. But hey, can't undo the fact that USC won the Super Bowl, that 4 Trojans won the Super Bowl. Anyway, as we come back to our show presented by FanDuel, the connection to make with Uchenna Nwosu sealing Super Bowl 60, Malcolm Smith making a big play, interception return. And by the way, to me, that was a fumble, not an interception by Uchenna. They're still calling it a pick six, so I guess you can say pick six in both games, but defensive touchdown, right? That's the clear connection. And so the 2 Seahawks Super Bowl wins, you both have USC Trojans scoring defensive touchdowns, significant defensive touchdowns as part of this. Another connection, Uchenna Nwosu and Sam Darnold, they both were on that field at Levi's Stadium in 2017. That's the last conference championship USC football has won, 2017 against Stanford in the Pac-12 championship game. So a lot of things came full circle for USC. And so Crash and Nolan, you're aware of the history. You're aware of these, hey, I remember that, or hey, this kind of brings up, a part of history again. So it's not just USC achieving in the present moment, but this recalls great USC achievements, college and NFL, 9, 12 years ago, reaching into the past. And that also helps, as Nolan was saying, that also helps build the brand for USC football. Crash and Nolan, your reactions to those connections, what you were thinking, what you were feeling when they happened.
Well, I guess I wasn't quite, obviously, I know a lot about, but it didn't click with me until you kind of mentioned it. But as you were talking, Matt, I was like, yeah, okay, that happened. Yeah, that happened. Oh, right. This all was it was all starting to come back to me right as you were talking. And it just shows obviously, while USC's, current in the present hasn't, been quite at the standard I think the Trojan family would hope, it shows the historical dominance of USC, especially in the past 12 to 15 years of Trojans just everywhere, really, just why USC has been one of the best, one of the top programs for college football for most of the history of the sport. I think that's kind of the big thing I'm drawing, especially when you're seeing with these recent players who, were at USC not too long ago. And then obviously all the connections you mentioned, Sam Darnold and Nwosu winning the Pac-12 at Levi Stadium. And then obviously, defensive touchdowns in the last 2, in the Seahawks 2 Super Bowl wins. It just shows how USC's really USC's impact on the NFL, I think, is really, the big thing I want to draw out. And I think it's obviously, like you said, it's obviously, I think like Nolan, you said, it's great for recruiting, but now you actually, if USC wants, continue to have that impact, what I'm now coming to is you got to now make that reality back in LA to continue to impact the game at the highest level for the years to come.
Yeah, and I think it serves as a great reminder that after the real, the last time we saw that was really with Pete Carroll, right? But after that, one of the best stretches we had was that kind of 2017 USC era, where you're winning the Pac-12 championship, and the standard, even if it wasn't winning a national title, the standard was you're the best team in the conference. And unfortunately, that's no longer the standard. Now, granted, USC is in a different conference, but but still, I don't think some of the more recent USC teams that we've seen would be the best team in the Pac-12. But I think it is a great reminder seeing some of these players in the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl. It serves as a great reminder that, hey, when they were at USC, this was the standard. The standard was you beat Stanford in the Pac-12 championship. The standard was you're still one of the best teams in college football. And USC has a bad name in the general eye of the public nowadays, in my opinion, from the standards that Lincoln Riley has set, the expectations that everyone had for USC, the drama that Caleb Williams brought, and the greatness that he was. And because of that, when USC underperforms, it's reflected in the eye of the general public. People hate on USC all the time, myself included at times. But I do think it's important to remember that, hey, not too long ago, less than 10 years ago, USC was consistently winning, and USC is very close to getting back to that point. So you got to watch out.
So, in terms of, let's talk a little bit about Leonard Williams. We talked about Uchenna Nwosu and the connection with Malcolm Smith in Super Bowl 48. Leonard Williams. Now, here's, this is a layered story. Leonard Williams has just been a really, really good player in the NFL for a long time, and that's also the kind of story that deserves to be told. But one piece of this story, it's just a small piece, but it is a piece with the USC angle, is that before Pete Carroll got fired by the Seahawks, he and John Schneider brought him into Seattle to join this team, and so it brings up the point that not only does Leonard Williams get this Super Bowl in Seattle, but Pete Carroll was responsible for bringing him there. And Pete Carroll, it was time. And Jody Allen, the Seahawks owner, made a very courageous and it turns out correct decision to say, hey, Pete Carroll's been really good, but it's time for that fresh voice in the building. It's just time for an upgrade. Not that Pete Carroll was failing, but we're not at the Super Bowl standard anymore. To get to that Super Bowl standard, need to get the fresh, vibrant mind who's ready for the 2025 NFL world, not the NFL world that Pete Carroll mastered in 2014. And so Mike Macdonald absolutely hitting it out of the park and taking this thing to the next level. But it should not be forgotten or minimized how many contributions Pete Carroll made. We can mention several really crucial contributions before Pete Carroll was fired. One is he let go of Russell Wilson. Would have been easy to stick with that. But no, he and John Schneider agree Russ needs to go. They make the trade with the Denver Broncos, which was a heist. Got several players that contributed to this roster. And the other really big decision, arguably the last really great Pete Carroll, John Schneider decision before Schneider took over and hired Mike Macdonald, drafting Devin Witherspoon at number 5 in the 2023 NFL draft. It was not viewed as a sure thing that Seattle was going to go there at number 5 in that draft. Could not have made a better selection. Witherspoon all over the field. His blitzes very effective in Super Bowl 60 against the Patriots. So Crash, Nolan, Pete Carroll, he needed to give way to Mike Macdonald, and this is Mike Macdonald's achievement for sure. But Pete Carroll made several really important decisions in just before he left that set the table for this Seahawks championship, the Leonard Williams trade into Seattle being one of them.
Well, I think you just see just how I think obviously, I think Pete Carroll, he's shown that he can be very loyal to times. Obviously, not an uncommon one is obviously he hired, at least with the Raiders, he hired his son onto the staff, which was very controversial, especially since it didn't work well. And then obviously when he was hired, he brought along Geno Smith, which didn't also work out. And maybe he does sometimes, try to work with, the guys who've helped him achieve what he's achieved for as long as possible. But I think at a certain point, if, obviously he's going to try to give it a go wherever he goes. So I think that's why, especially in year one with the Raiders, he tried to having his son on staff, try to have it, giving it another go with Smith in Las Vegas. But I think he realized, especially with Russell Wilson, was, okay, this isn't okay. I think this has run its course. It was a good run. Russ, I love you, but we got to do what's best for the team. So, yeah, yes, pretty much. But I think it just shows that, yeah, like at times, yeah, like Carroll has shown a lot of loyalty, but I think when he realizes, okay, like if I want to keep winning, I'm sometimes going to have to make those tough decisions. I think that's just what it shows he was able to do and just help position the franchise for this great run, obviously under Mike Macdonald.
I think it also shows that Carroll, as a quality head coach, didn't fall off as much as some people seem to think. I know Carroll was not up to his own standard during the last couple of years of his coaching career. There's no doubt about that. He is not back to the Super Bowl or national championship standard that he had set for himself. There's no doubt about that. But good coaches don't become ineffective with age just in the blink of an eye. Like, they're still making good decisions. They know football, they know ball, they know how to run a team. Maybe they don't have the charisma they used to have, although I don't think that was Carroll's issue. For him, I mean, the game has changed so much, and perhaps he didn't adapt as well to the new changing game. But he absolutely, I mean, the Seahawks may not have won the Super Bowl if it weren't for Pete Carroll. I don't know if that's what you were implying, Matt, but I'm going to say it. There's a very strong chance that the Seahawks did not win if it weren't for Pete Carroll. And I think you can look at all the moves that you talked about. I think one of the great things, you also talked about Leonard Williams, and he was a guy kind of similar to Darnold, where the last 2 years, those have bin career years for Leonard Williams. And that's a great thing to see as a Trojan. I mean, he's had back-to-back Pro Bowl years. I think his story has kind of been on the back burner compared to Darnold, just because everyone counted Darnold off. No one counted Leonard Williams out, but he is performing at the next level these last 2 years. But anyway, Pete Carroll, I mean, he absolutely deserves some credit for the Super Bowl win, because there is no guarantee the Seahawks win it without Pete Carroll.
Yeah, I'm just saying, Pete Carroll, he gave Mike Macdonald some groceries. He provided some ingredients, and Macdonald was the master chef, creating that 7-course meal in Seattle. Like, it's Macdonald's achievement, but Pete Carroll did give Macdonald material to work with, but Macdonald was absolutely brilliant in making it happen. All right, we're presented by FanDuel, so we have to do a FanDuel prop at some point in our show. But before we get to our FanDuel item, there's a lesson for Lincoln Riley at USC, isn't there? In the things we've been talking about, Pete Carroll making the tough choice to divorce Russell Wilson, the Seahawks making the tough choice to divorce Pete Carroll, guy who won a Super Bowl. Loyalty matters to a point, but at some point you have to prioritize excellence over loyalty. And we have seen, to an extent, Lincoln Riley finally allowing other people to make choices. Chad Bowden restructuring the program in various ways. And now we have Gary Patterson filling out his own staff, his guys. Lincoln Riley did not saddle Gary Patterson with holdovers. No, Gary Patterson got to restock the cupboard with his position coaches. But of course, we're still feeling the negative effects of Lincoln Riley being too loyal to Benny Wiley, strength coach, too loyal to Alex Grinch, giving him that second season in 2023. Man, this lesson just keeps circling around. It keeps boomeranging around, right, Crash and Nolan, that loyalty matters to a point, but excellence trumps loyalty, and it has to every single time.
Matt, I'm just going to say, Nolan and I discussed this a couple of years back when we were podcasting for Annenberg. You have no idea how many times this subject with Alex Grinch in particular came up. Just wanted to bring that up. Throw back to our scoreboard days, Nolan.
Yeah, we discussed that a lot. And I think, once Grinch was no longer on the team, USC students and fans alike were saying, Lincoln finally learned you can't stay loyal to a friend, and you stay loyal to a friend. You don't stay loyal to a friend as an employee. And you also don't stay loyal to comfortability. You don't stay loyal to an assistant coach who is comfortable to the program. You don't want to have to train someone new. You don't want to have to teach them. But it seems like we kind of get to this point every year where Lincoln slowly starts to wipe the coaching staff, bring in a new staff, but it's not a total wipe. It's not a totally new staff that there should be. And it's unfortunate, but it seems like it's just going to take a bunch of trial and error for us to finally get to a point where Lincoln says, yeah, every year, if you didn't perform as an assistant coach, you're gone. But that's how it should be, right? I mean, there should be a standard, and you got to meet that standard every year. It doesn't seem like that. It doesn't seem like Lincoln quite agrees with that. So I can only say this, but I think Lincoln disagrees.
I want to just highlight just Texas for a minute and the fact that we talked about Nolan. I know you kind of had a little bit of a different preference. So I don't want to speak on behalf of you, but Matt, you recall obviously before Nolan joined us here along with Ethan, that we were really all about USC wanting to hire Pete Kwiatkowski, and Kwiatkowski got fired after 3 losses and held Ohio State to 14 points. Like, the number 1 team in the country for most of the regular season, and he still gets canned. Like, I'm not saying that, Lincoln Riley should be firing defensive coordinators after, for holding Ohio State to 14 for a year like that on a good Texas team. But, that just shows how cutthroat he's being. Like, obviously, there's a lot of turnover. I mean, Josh Heupel hired Jim Knowles. Obviously, I'd say that was a bit more warranted with how Tennessee's defense was, but you just look at how cutthroat some head coaches are. It's like, if you're not doing your job, you're gone. So I'm wondering, like, is he ever going to get to that point? So that's why I wanted to bring up Kwiatkowski's name in the regard of the fact that he got canned from Texas over 3 losses and 14 points to Ohio State.
Absolutely. So, the tension between loyalty and excellence in the building, a big lesson from the Seattle Seahawks win. More on Sam Darnold in a bit, but again, we're presented by FanDuel, so we always dive into at least one FanDuel item. It's part of the fun. It's part of FanDuel's commitment to us. So this is how we reciprocate our commitment to FanDuel. So, college March Madness a little bit around the bend. So, hopefully USC will be in the NCAA tournament. Big game for the Trojan men's basketball team against Ohio State. But, football is still on the brain, right? And this is primarily a football show. So we go to FanDuel's NFL futures for the coming season. And so we have the Seahawks slight favorites at plus 750. The Rams are right behind at plus 800. And then the Baltimore Ravens, the top team in the AFC at plus 1,200. You can go down the list. Bills plus 1,200, Packers plus 1,300. See the Chargers there plus 1,500. So, and we're going to talk more about Sam Darnold, guys, in a bit. But just your initial gut feel in terms of who you think is probably going to get to Super Bowl 61, which is in SoFi Stadium once again. Of course, the last time the Super Bowl was in SoFi, the Rams won the trophy, and you had Eric Henderson, former USC defensive line coach, coaching Aaron Donald to the win over Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals. So, guys, your just initial thoughts on how you think the race to Super Bowl 61 on Valentine's Day, latest Super Bowl ever, next year, 2027, shapes up. Crash and then Nolan.
I'm really not sure, Matt, because, I mean, we saw all sorts of teams just weren't the Ravens projected to reach the Super Bowl this year? I feel like it's just at this point, I'm not saying that, I don't think based on what we saw, I could easily see the Seahawks repeating, assuming, they keep the team intact that they had. But at the same time, it's a total crapshoot what's going to happen. There's obviously a lot of coaching changes, a lot of, personnel changes, player changes on a lot of teams. So it's just really hard to estimate this early on, especially before the draft too. So if you were making me pick now, I'd probably call the Seahawks to repeat, but I'm it's hard to know what's going to happen because we have this discussion every year. We're like, oh, all right, great. Super Bowl's over. Who's winning next year? We have this already, and we haven't even gotten to the draft. But I'm not saying it's not fun to have the conversation. I like having it, but it's just interesting to think that's I'm going to look back at this in a year and be like, that was not wise to say. So I'd probably go Seahawks now, but I'm also want to see more of how teams actually look and perform before I start feeling okay, this could actually work, because a lot can happen in 12 months.
I think initial thoughts. I mean, the first thing actually that caught my eye was I feel like I don't know back in the day, like a couple of years ago, you'd always see whoever would win the Super Bowl. A lot of times the Chiefs. The following year, they'd start at like plus 300 or 400 because they were just so clearly the best team in the NFL. And I think it's really interesting right now, looking at first of all, those rivals, Seahawks and Rams, right next to each other, and not too far away from the rest of the pack, all kind of bunched up. You got the Seahawks, the Rams, Ravens, Bills, Packers, all kind of in that range of teams that have a strong likelihood of getting there. But is there really a clear best team? I'm not sure. I think I thought for the longest time that the Rams would be in the Super Bowl this year. I thought they had a really strong team, and I thought that Stafford would outplay Darnold. Obviously, that didn't end up happening, but I'm going to call a repeat of the NFC Conference Championship for next year. I think whoever the winner of the Rams Seahawks, they'll be in the Super Bowl. And then I think from the AFC, I would not be surprised if the Broncos end up there, just because while this year I thought, like most people, they'd been overrated the entire year. They had 14-3 record, I believe, and everyone knows they were not a 14-3 team. But I think Bo Nix is going to have another year under his belt. I think that offense will be a little better, and that defense was pretty strong. So I would not be surprised to see a Broncos versus winner of the Seahawks Rams NFC Conference Championship rematch in the Super Bowl.
All right. Well, it is early, and of course we have NFL free agency in March, and then we have the draft in late April. So many transactions and so many roster decisions are going to be made. Will Kenneth Walker stay with the Seahawks? Just one consideration of many. And then, you consider what other teams are going through. So it's early, right? But we're having fun with this, presented by FanDuel. My early thought is, the 49ers and Chiefs have a way of reuniting in the Super Bowl every few years. And look at these odds. Seahawks first favorite, Rams pretty much, 1B, Ravens, Bills, Packers, Chargers. The Niners and Chiefs are on that list. That's crazy. Like I would certainly be looking into Niners versus Chiefs in Super Bowl 61. Keep in mind that the Niners were the 6th seed in the NFC playoffs, so they were the third place team in the NFC West, so they're going to play a third place schedule. The Chiefs were third in the AFC West, so they get to play. Like, the Chiefs have been playing first place schedules for a long time. Now they get to play a third place schedule. And, the inverse of this is the Patriots next season, I should say, they're going to be playing a first place schedule. So, the amazingly soft, fortuitous schedule the Patriots had, that's going to go away. The Broncos are also going to play a first place schedule. So to me, 49ers, Chiefs, third place schedules, that's where I'd be looking for my first thought in Super Bowl 61. The Rams might have the best roster on paper, but Stafford getting, near age 40, just the body might not hold up. Just takes one injury to kind of sidetrack the Rams there. And then for the Seahawks, they're young and they have a great overall cap situation. They should be able to retain a lot of their guys, but the ball did bounce favorably for them. And, they were down 16 to the Rams late in that Thursday night game, which really was the pivot point of the season. Seahawks don't win that game. They don't get the 1 seed. And all 4 times the Seahawks have made the Super Bowl, it's been as the number 1 seed. Like, they need that home field. They don't win NFC championships on the road. It has to go through Seattle. So, it was improbable that the Seahawks got there just because, down 16 to the Rams. The Rams never should have lost that game. But I'm not quite sold on Seattle repeating, because I think the ball is going to have to bounce just right once again. And I'm not quite sold on the Rams because a Stafford injury could just, is very easy to envision. So 49ers, Chiefs, that's my early look at Super Bowl 61. All right, so let's now circle back to Sam Darnold. We'll talk a little bit about USC football and the new addition to the or promotion, I should say, on the coaching staff. We're going to get to that story on tonight's show. But circle back to Sam Darnold, and one big picture thought about Sam Darnold is, do we view Sam Darnold as a better overall NFL quarterback than Carson Palmer? Is Sam Darnold now USC's best NFL quarterback ever, or does Carson Palmer's body of work with the Bengals, with the Cardinals, is that still like an overall higher standard? And do we think, hey, Darnold's been a rock star the past 2 seasons, but Darnold needs to now deliver that for several more years. Then we can say Sam Darnold's the best USC NFL quarterback of all time. Crash, then Nolan, the Carson Palmer versus Sam Darnold conversation. Where do you come down on that?
Matt, you're putting me in a tough spot because every football game I'm repping
We ask the tough questions here at the USC channel.
I'm repping that Carson Palmer jersey proud at the Coliseum every Saturday. I mean, obviously, it's because Palmer with the Heisman, all that. So it's kind of why.
Yeah, like Lincoln Riley, you're on the hot seat.
Fair enough, but I think it's a tough one because on the one hand, you got Sam Darnold with the Super Bowl and has played very well, but I'm kind of leaning a bit towards Palmer, not because I wear his number 3, even though I did have to factor it in. But at the same time, you look at just what Palmer has done, but obviously, he had to play in some very, tough situations with, especially at Cincinnati where, things kind of were, kind of up and down at times. Things weren't always good. I remember just some years where, they really struggled. But I think just when you look at just what Palmer did, especially during his time in Cincinnati, and then also like those last couple of years in Arizona, or that last final stint in Arizona, it's just, I think just his body of work just as an NFL quarterback and the longevity, how long he's able to start and play for, I think kind of gives him the edge. But I still think you definitely, really got to weigh in just how well Darnold has done both in Minnesota last year and Seattle this year. So I think that, so I'm kind of giving the edge to Palmer on that one, but it's definitely a close call for me.
I mean, this comes down to, I guess, the age. What do you value more, like a better prime or longevity? I mean, usually that discussion's for GOAT debates. Right now, we're talking about a retired quarterback and an active quarterback, but that's really what it comes down to, right? Because Palmer never won a Super Bowl. Darnold has, and I think the last 2 years of Darnold is probably better than any Palmer injuries that he had. But Palmer also did it for 15 years, and Darnold really has only had 2 good seasons. You can say whatever you want about being on the Jets isn't going to help you one bit, but that's what he was working with. I'm not ready to say that Darnold is better than Palmer just because 15 years versus 2 years of good production from Darnold, that's a big difference. In order for me to give 2 years more weight, I'm going to have to see like an MVP season, which he didn't have, or I'd have to see a dominant Super Bowl performance. And it wasn't. Obviously, Darnold outperformed May, and Darnold held his own, but Darnold also completed 50% of his balls and was kind of led down the field by his running back for a lot of the game. No shade at all to Darnold. He did what he had to do, no doubt about it. But if you're talking about 2 years of good production versus 15, you got to have something to move the needle a lot, right? I'm hoping for one of the best Super Bowl performances that I've seen, and that's not what we're talking about here. I think Darnold did what he had to do, but when you're talking about a 15-year veteran who was consistently taking kind of a mediocre roster to a decent record, someone who put up good numbers and was a reliable quarterback, give Darnold a couple more years and then he'll have Palmer beat. Although Caleb was also right there. So I think the competition is going to be between those two, Caleb Williams and Sam Darnold, in a couple of years.
I think the really important thing to mention in the Carson Palmer versus Sam Darnold comparison, which USC NFL quarterback is better, in the pros, is that, Carson Palmer got Bruce Arians with the Cardinals late in his career. He was able to turn in a 13-3 season in 2015, would have made the Super Bowl, except the 2015 Carolina Panthers were awesome. They were 17-1 NFC champions before losing to the Broncos in Super Bowl 50. Also played in Santa Clara, side of this year's Super Bowl. So the Cardinals were a really good team, but they ran into a freight train with the Cam Newton Carolina Panthers. But the point being that if Carson Palmer had Bruce Arians for 5 or 6 more seasons in his lengthy career, he probably gets there. He probably gets to a Super Bowl. And I have an uncle in Cincinnati. I've been a Bengals fan for much of my life. I'm also a Seahawks fan because I lived in Seattle for 22 years. So Seahawks for my NFC team, Bengals my AFC team. And in the 1980s, it was Bengals more than Seahawks. I gotta confess that. But then the Seahawks went over to the NFC. But followed the Bengals for a long time with great interest. And Marvin Lewis, one of the great defensive minds of all time, and the 2000 Baltimore Ravens, the team that smothered the New York Giants in Super Bowl 35. One of the great defenses of all time. Marvin Lewis's chops as a defensive coordinator, right up there with Buddy Ryan, the other great defensive tacticians you can think of. But as a head coach, man, what a graveyard for Carson Palmer. And Carson Palmer had really good receivers in Cincinnati. He had Ocho Cinco, Chad Johnson. He had TJ Houshmandzadeh. He had some really good receivers. There was skill position talent there, but Marvin Lewis running the show, and you just think of where was the Ben Johnson, where was the Sean McVay, where was the Kyle Shanahan, the offensive genius to make the pieces on the chessboard come alive. You go through the mediocre Bengal offensive coordinators under Marvin Lewis. Carson Palmer, toiling for roughly a decade in Cincinnati, never had the benefit of that. So I'm not saying that necessarily makes Carson Palmer's career better, but it just reinforces the point. You're only as good as your coaching. Carson Palmer, grew as a quarterback under Bruce Arians, but of course he was old at the time. And after that great 13-3 season for the Cardinals in 2015, then he gets hurt in 2016 and reached the end of the line. His body gave out. So just that is an important piece of the larger context when we have this Sam Darnold versus Carson Palmer conversation. Palmer never got his Clint Kubiak in Cincinnati. He got Bruce Arians only at the tail end. Sam Darnold has a good situation in Seattle, and we'll see what Mike McDonald does. I'm thinking he's going to promote from within, so that just the continuity of the offense, no one has to relearn a new system from scratch. But Sam Darnold finding stability and good coaching in Seattle has meant so much for his career. And I just make the point again: if Patrick Mahomes was drafted by the Raiders or the Titans, where would his career be? You're only as good as your coaching, for the most part, in the NFL. That's a really big part of the Sam Darnold story. So, other items as part of the Sam Darnold story to unpack. One is, the Vikings. The Vikings have, undergone some turmoil in their front office. They're making some changes. And so this brings back the conversation of, they had a choice, JJ McCarthy or Sam Darnold. How skeptical or how disapproving were you and are you of how the Vikings handled their quarterback situation? We're kind of revisiting this. I mean, a year ago, people had their opinions, and now we can see, that the Seahawks were certainly wise to trust Darnold, but let's just be fair. All right. Are we second guessing the Vikings? Did we actually think it was the right move at the time to keep JJ McCarthy, or was this always wrong? Like Sam Darnold won 14 games for the Vikings. Well, you don't mess with that kind of success. So Crash, Nolan, 1 year later, your thoughts on how the Vikings handled Sam Darnold, where you were, where you are, and what you think the reasonable position is on this issue.
Well, I think at the time, I understood why the Vikings wanted JJ McCarthy. He's younger. You're going to get more years out of him. I think Darnold obviously proved a lot that year, but were people wondering, was it just, did we get lucky? Was it a fluke? I mean, I'm based on kind of everything I've been learning about Darnold in the 2 weeks leading up to the Super Bowl, especially, like I said, I read Max Brown's piece in The Athletic. If you haven't read it, you should read it. I think he even like posts like screenshots to a lot of it so you can read it there. But I think what it just shows is I think the Vikings like, yeah, you know what? It was great having Sam. He helps rescue our season, but we got this young guy waiting, and we were going to go to him originally before he got injured. So I think the Vikings were justified to do what they did. And honestly, I have to think they'd probably have done the same thing looking back at it now a year later, just because you don't know what's going to happen. You got this young guy waiting. You want to give him his chance. And meanwhile, as far as they know, Darnold's track record, and yes, I do, like we've been talking, Matt, you've obviously made the point, which I absolutely agree with that. You know, you're only as good as the coaching situation you're put into. Yes, he'd been in some tough coaching situations, but also when he had gotten his chances, he'd struggled in those. Yes, I will blame that on coaching, but at the end of the day, the stats are what they are. So I think the Vikings were fully as much it pains me to say it, I think the Vikings were fully justified to do what they did. And I'm going to guess they probably aren't regretting it. And then also you got to factor in the Vikings too were just in a tough division this year. The NFC North was good, like on any given night. And like you could have seen that division going any of those four ways, to be completely honest with you, as you know, the season got underway. So I don't really think it's so much that the Vikings made the wrong decision. I think it was just they realized they had this guy, they had McCarthy, they were going to bet on him, and that just meant that they had to let Darnold go, as tough as that was to see after the year he had. But obviously happy with how it worked out for him.
Well, Crash, you had me until you said that you don't think the Vikings regret what they did. I think at this point, when you let a quarterback go and then he leads his team to a Super Bowl, I think looking back at it, the right decision had to have been you got to keep Darnold. I agree with you 100% that at the time, the right move very well could have. Sorry, cut out there again. But yeah, I think, I don't know. I think at the time, I thought either decision would have been all right. I thought neither decision would have brought them success. I wasn't a huge fan of number 9, and I also wasn't a huge fan of Sam Darnold. I thought Darnold had a great 14-3 year with the Vikings, and I thought him moving on to Seattle was going to make sure that he left Minnesota on a high note, just given his track record. And I'll echo what Crash said about Matt's point. It's 100% true that you're only as good as your head coach, but just because you had a bad head coach doesn't mean that you're also an elite quarterback. And I guess the Vikings looked at it and said, thanks Sam, but we've got it from here with a younger quarterback. And I didn't think that was the wrong move at the time. And yeah, if I was in their front office and I could change it, I would change it for them. I think Darnold is obviously the better quarterback, but I don't think it's a crazy thing to do at the time. Absolutely not. Given Sam Darnold's track record then, not a crazy thing to do to let him go.
Yeah, trying to revisit this from my perspective, hey, again, I'm a Seahawk fan. I lived in Seattle for over 20 years. I was skeptical of Darnold in Seattle. Like, I didn't think that it was a home run for the Seahawks to land him. But, interestingly, one thing we've talked about earlier in this show tonight here on USC Primetime Live at the Voice of College Football presented by FanDuel, talked about Pete Carroll, not getting his offensive line coaching situation in order with the Raiders. It's part of why that all bottomed out. If you're going to bring Geno Smith over, you need a good offensive line to protect him. And the thing that Pete Carroll did not do nearly well enough toward the end of his Seahawk tenure, which carried over into the Raiders, offensive line coaching. And so as skeptical as I was of the Seahawks bringing in Sam Darnold, I thought, okay, if they can build a complete roster around him, if they can give him a good offensive line, it can work. And that's what happened. And Mike Macdonald, defense first coach, but he knew how to build a full roster. John Schneider also, helping him there. But the developmental part and the front office piece of the puzzle, they all came together in Seattle to help Sam Darnold. So that's a piece of context that's well worth mentioning. But now back to the Vikings. Darnold's last game with the Vikings was that disaster in the wild card round against the Rams. And the Rams have been Sam Darnold's kryptonite. So it was easy for the Vikings to look at that game and say, hey, Sam Darnold, great regular season, but was not remotely close in the playoffs. You can understand the cold feet that the Vikings got as an organization surrounding Sam Darnold, that as well as he played, he might have hit the ceiling. But here's where the Vikings miscalculated. The Detroit Lions had a great regular season 2 seasons ago. Like normally 14-3, you're getting a number 1 or number 2 seed. But the Lions were 15-2 in that 2024 NFL season. It was just bad luck that the Vikings went up against an in-division opponent, which was really good. The thought process in the Vikings room should have been, I'm not going to second guess, the hesitation about Sam Darnold based on the Rams game, but where the Vikings could have trusted Sam Darnold more and should have trusted him more was that, okay, Detroit, we dare you to be 15-2 again. You at least want to give Sam Darnold one more year. What if he replicates 14-3? Is Detroit going to go 15-2 2 years running? Maybe not. And with Ben Johnson leaving as offensive coordinator, and we saw how much he helped Caleb Williams in Chicago, that took away a lot from the Lions. The Lions coordinators weren't nearly as good this season as they were last season. So that was Minnesota's fundamental miscalculation, is that, you went 14-3. It's different when you lose a division and you're like 11-6, and you left something on the table and the division winner at 12-5 beats you out. You go 14-3. You didn't win the division, but you still set the bar really high. Run it back at least 1 year with Sam Darnold. See what he can do. Challenge the Lions to be better. That, to me, was the miscalculation that the Minnesota Vikings made. So really interesting conversation. And once again, all of us here on the USC channel at the Voice of College Football send our congratulations to Sam Darnold. Just a spectacular achievement, a great moment for him, a great moment for his teammates, and a great moment for USC football. So before we get to USC football, we are going to talk about the actual Trojans for a little bit, but this was kind of an NFL-themed show with the U.S. Seahawks reveling in their Super Bowl championship. We do need to talk about how you can support the channel here. The USC channel, the Voice of College Football. You go to our homepage at YouTube, you click that join button, and you go to the Heisman middle tier, the national champion tier, the top tier. You get exclusive insider access as a member to our bonus cuts that we've been doing. So that's one way you can support the channel. And then also vocfb.com/shop. We don't have Ethan modeling his snappy camo USC cap, but we have VOCFB caps with the USC branding. You get a USC branded piece of merch, whether it's a cap, t-shirt, coffee mug, tumbler, you name it. Go around to vocfb.com/shop. USC products that you purchase help the USC channel here at the Voice of College Football, USC Primetime Live, presented by FanDuel. All right, so winding down the show, and the main news that broke just before we came on air, Skylar Jones gets promoted internally from analyst to defensive tackles coach, not defensive line coach, defensive tackles coach. So, Crash, Nolan, your reaction to this latest move on the USC coaching staff for 2026?
I think it seems like there's been a lot of praise for Skylar Jones. Obviously, as you know, the news was breaking. We were about to go live. I was obviously, quickly doing my research on it because it kind of caught me pretty late. But I think obviously Eric Henderson's super happy for him. But then again, he did work under Henny, so that makes sense. So I kind of going this one. I want to be I'm trying to be optimistic, but obviously, I think just with how things ended and just Danson Lynn leaving, like I said, I think with kind of all these moves, it's like I kind of want to see. I'm kind of wasn't opposed to seeing the whole defensive staff getting revamped under Gary Patterson, or for that matter, whoever they were going to bring in, whether it was Kwiatkowski or just any of the other candidates whose names we threw out throughout the search process. But I think that just I'm definitely curious to see how this hire goes. I'm not opposed to it, but also the main question I had is this Lincoln Riley's influence or Gary Patterson's? Because if it's Gary Patterson's, I'm all for it. Whereas if it's Lincoln Riley's, I'm going to be a little more hesitant about it. So I guess that's kind of the angle I'm going at, is who was kind of the one behind this decision, or or could USC have gone out and got someone else? So I like the hire. It sounds like he connects well with the players, so I think it's good for the continuity at that position. But but the question there, I guess, is that what USC needs? Especially since there were some issues all along. Obviously he's just coaching defensive tackles, but just the whole defensive line struggled at times. So this past season. So I'm wondering, is it the right move for that? I get, obviously, and I'm not saying I'm opposed to, coach being able to connect well with players. There's certainly something to be said for it, but I'm wondering, is that what USC needs right now?
I think this is just a tough one because when it comes to promoting within, it's usually, especially when you talk about promoting someone to a coordinator, it's very easy to tell how strong of an impact they had on that team. If you take a defensive line coach or a secondary coach, any positional coach, it's pretty clear. Look at how that unit performed before you got there and look at how they performed with you there. It pretty much signals how good of a job you did. When you're analyzing some sort of specialist or analyst, it's really hard to know exactly the impact that he had. What aspect of the Trojans defense last year could possibly could come from a specialist or analyst, and what wasn't. It's very difficult. And so I think this is something that really no one's going to know if this was a good hire, rather promotion, until the year actually begins, or until the season begins. But the only strong opinion that I have about this is the fact that the only time I ever saw Lincoln Riley improve this defense was when he got rid of Alex Grinch, brought in D'Anton Lynn, who basically wiped the entire staff. Did not promote within, because why would you promote from within a unit that isn't functioning well? You don't do that. You don't promote within, I don't want to call it a dysfunctional, but certainly an underperforming unit year in, year out. It's not to say that there's not any, there's definitely not one bad egg. There's a lot of bad eggs, but that's not to say there's not a good egg. Maybe he is one of the good eggs, but it is a little scary knowing that the best revamps this defense has ever seen is when you wipe everyone out and bring a bunch of new faces in, and that's not what this is. So that's just a minor thought. I don't think anyone can really feel confident about this until you actually see the impact that he has on the field, though.
So what do you guys say about the point that, all right, Eric Henderson's gone, and the defensive line recruits, part of this 2026 class, and also, Jakeem Stewart as well, returning players, you're losing a familiar voice in the room, somebody that these guys knew, had established a relationship with. What do you say about the idea that, well, with Skylar Jones, you're keeping one of those familiar voices in the room, and that way you're kind of maintaining some cohesion, some continuity. You're keeping someone in the building that the guys trust, and you balance that against, like there was a Texas Tech's defensive line coach, was out there as a potential target, and you're not getting that. Like like a lot of people were talking about the Texas Tech's defensive line coach as a potential USC target, and we saw how great Texas Tech's defensive line was. Like that defensive line played well against Oregon in the Orange Bowl. Texas Tech lost because its offense got shut out, but the defensive line did a really good job against that Oregon offensive line. So you're thinking, ooh, we could get that guy. And then, yeah, this feels like you're settling for second or third best. But how do you balance that against the need to have some continuity in the room and a voice that players trust? Let's go to Nolan first and then Crash.
Yeah, you need a familiar voice, but that doesn't mean that should get in the way of finding the right guy. You can keep someone around to have that familiar voice while still saying, hey, at the end of the day, this is the most important job with this unit. Let's find the best guy for that. When it comes to guys who are familiar, they're almost akin to kind of a locker room guy in terms of a player, at least for this purpose. If you're talking about a familiar face, that's someone that you just want in the room because he's trusted, because he has a strong voice, because he brings continuity. That's not someone that should get in the way of bringing on the best guy for the job. That's someone that you find a role that works for him, that works for the role that you want him to be in, and that he'll fill perfectly. So I think both can coexist, but you can't let your desire to continue to maintain some continuity to get in the way of someone who's proven to do a very strong job, like you said, Matt, against Oregon.
Matt, I'm leaning towards, I think that if things are going great, Eric Henderson's like, you know what, I'm going back to the NFL. Okay, I suppose that makes sense because you know what, that unit is performing at the standard that is expected of it. But I think like what Nolan's been saying, especially after hearing your point, Nolan, is that if things aren't going the way you hope, don't you usually need a fresh voice? I get the idea of continuity, and I'm not opposed to it, like I said, but can you do better? Especially if, you're realizing, okay, we kind of got, in some ways, the opportunity. We even have to, fire the guy. He left of his own volition. So that gives us even more of a clean slate to come in and figure out, all right, who do we really want here? And was this actually working? Because it's hard to make the case that what was going on in the defensive line room, just in the defensive tackles, was fully working. So I think that that's something that could definitely, USC could have used the opportunity to really, figure out, all right, who do we want? So I'm very, I'm trying to stay optimistic, but I think it's like when you see how it performed, I'm just wondering, is the continuity good just because it clearly wasn't exactly working the way it needed to? So do you need a fresh voice that's going to, be able to, get the production, get the results, get the output that is desired on the field on Saturdays?
So this leads me to a question separate from Skylar Jones, and that is, okay, so you have Skylar Jones coaching defensive tackles. There's this guy who's been retained, or at least he's still on the staff right now, Sean Nua. And I'm pretty sure, Crash, you were with me when we had this conversation a few weeks ago, that like I didn't see a word written about Sean Nua at all.
I'm remembering this, Matt.
Yeah, like I legit, it's embarrassing, but like I legitimately forgot he was even on the staff, because like I did not see one commentator, one writer, one talking head say anything. Like I'm on Twitter throughout the football season, so like I'm keeping tabs on who's saying what and people in the news. I did not see one tweet in 4 months from September through the Alamo Bowl on Sean Nua. So like that tells you just the lack of impact he had. But he's been on this staff for a few years now. So, obviously the Skylar Jones is getting the fresh reaction from USC fans in the chat. But like Sean Nua, and of course Eric Henderson didn't max out. Sean Nua didn't max out. Should we be talking more about, hey, why is Sean Nua being retained? Let's go to Crash and then to Nolan on this one.
I have to think that if, in general, if you're a position coach and your name isn't being mentioned much, that's probably a good thing. It's like, think what Justin Dietich's dad told me once about offensive linemen. If you hear their number, it's not a good reason. But I'm wondering, like, I think I don't think I saw much about Nua either. I mean, I knew he was on staff all year, but I don't think I saw a word about him until I think Brian Karchi reported in his Times of Troy newsletter that Nua was like the coach that was expected to be retained. And keep in mind, he's been on the staff on USC staff from the start. He was there throughout the Grinch years, the Lynn years, and he's now continuing on with the Patterson years. So I'm just wondering, I think when you have this opportunity to, just like I was saying, kind of revamp your staff after, Danton Lynn leaves on his own, it gives you the opportunity to kind of, maybe start fresh. And clearly they must think, okay, he's got to be doing something good if we're going to keep him around. But at the same time, I'm wondering, is it time for fresh ideas? We've criticized the defensive line. Obviously, a lot of it came under Eric Henderson. In part, he did have, in addition to being, the defensive line coach, he also did have co-DC and run game coordinator in his title as well. So I think that probably also does attribute to us, mentioning Henderson maybe a bit more than warranted, to be completely honest. But I think at the same time, and I think just because of Henderson's titles, we were just mentioning him. And I think that maybe, I guess, allowed Nua to slide under the radar a little bit. So I don't want to say he's done a bad job, but I'm also wondering if, your year 5 defense hasn't quite hit where you need it to hit, and you're Lincoln Riley heading in the hot seat. You brought in a Hall of Famer head coach to be your new DC. You have to wonder, like, if I have to wonder, like, did they must really want him, because it would be an opportunity, like I've said a lot, for them to either move him or move on from him. Like, I mean, we saw Rob Ryan move to an analyst role. Doug Belk, contract not renewed. Eric Henderson, not sure. Obviously, it was left of his own volition, but you have to wonder what went on behind the scenes, especially with how late in the cycle it was. So if all these moves are happening, you have to wonder, did USC actually consider letting him go, or are they just trying to see, like, all right, do we want this guy? So I'm very curious, but I think definitely, I'm wondering if Nua's name will be mentioned, because obviously he was mentioned a lot when he was the interim co-defensive coordinator back in 2023, but his name hasn't been brought up much since.
Nolan.
Yeah, I think given how this unit has performed since Lincoln got here, there is no reason why anyone should have been retained heading in to really last season and especially this year. The unit's underperformed. It's very simple. And the unit, yes, has gotten better, but all around, you can point to secondary, linebackers, defensive line. At some point, every unit had their down year, right? Maybe earlier in the Lincoln Riley days, the secondary was clearly better than the secondary was last year. You can find a different timeline for the D-line. You can find a different timeline for the linebackers. But the only element of continuity with this unit is that they do not keep up with the offensive unit. That's very simple. And so there's no reason to me why any assistant coach, any positional coach has a reason to be retained. Maybe definitely Henderson was the only more consistent coach within this unit, I would say. Other than him, I do not see a reason why there should be any element of continuity when you can wipe that whole unit down, and you can use your brand of USC. You can use the fact that you have the #1 recruiting class that should attract some very, very solid coaches, should it not? I mean, where else would you really rather be if you're going to be a linebackers coach, a defensive line coach, a defensive tackles coach, whatever your title may be? I can count on probably one or maximum two hands the number of schools that you'd rather coach at than a school named USC that has the top recruiting class this year. So I also think the fact that you haven't heard Nua's name for an entire year shows that he truly has no impact at this point. I thought that was a funny comment. But yeah, at this point, anyone that has been at USC for more than 1 or 2 years on a struggling defensive unit. Why keep them? It's time to move on. And this year especially, it's a great time to move on, get rid of the baggage that this coaching staff has, find new guys, find the guys that are the future of this team. This is the time to do it.
I would just add this point that, we see what Curt Cignetti has done at Indiana, the gold standard for, quick, instant, dramatic transformations of a program. And what Cignetti has done, and this is no secret anymore, he gets veteran guys in the portal, guys ready to play, ready to be coached up, can make an instant impact. You don't have to start from square one with these guys. And so, Trojan Fight in the chat made the point. I highlighted his comment just a moment ago. Let me pop it up once again. Had they let Nua go, multiple recruits might have left in the portal, more multiple guys at least. And this gets to the point that we talked about with Dante Williams when he was at USC. He was a great recruiter, ace recruiter, but would he coach up his guys? Like we saw Georgia's secondary get shredded by Trinidad Chambliss and Ole Miss in the Sugar Bowl, and actually in the regular season too. 43-35 in the regular season, and I think this game, the Sugar Bowl, was 39-34. So, Dante Williams can't coach. He's not a good coach. He's a brilliant recruiter, but he can't coach. And so it just brings up the point. You have recruits coming in, and you're keeping mediocre position coaches in terms of technique and results to retain your recruiting class. That cost benefit's not great. And so it brings up the point. If USC leaned into the portal more, got these ready-to-play guys that Cignetti does at Indiana, and had better coaches as part of that bargain, like you're not keeping mediocre coaches to retain your elite, top-rated recruiting class, and these are freshmen. They're not all going to be instant impact stars. It brings up a point about the cost benefit in terms of winning now versus being patient and being willing to take 2 or 3 years to develop high school recruits. And Crash, you've made this point. Ethan's made this point when he was here in recent weeks. USC's in a win now situation. So is it really the best chess move to keep less than great position coaches to retain a freshman recruiting class that, if Lincoln Riley gets fired this season, everyone's going to scatter anyway? Shouldn't you be loading up more with veteran studs in the portal the way Curt Cignetti does at Indiana? It's food for thought, and it's something that we're going to be wrestling with throughout this offseason at USC football. All right, folks, that's our show. Again, congratulations to Sam Darnold, Leonard Williams, Uchenna Nwosu, and Brandon Peely, Super Bowl Trojans with the U.S. Seahawks. A very proud moment in Super Bowl 60. And also, we should add this. Didn't mention it yet. Got to mention it before we go. The Seahawks avenge Pete Carroll's toughest loss as an NFL head coach. They couldn't avenge the 2006 Rose Bowl, his toughest college loss, but they did avenge his toughest NFL loss. No one in Seattle is going to have to worry about Super Bowl 49 and Malcolm Butler ever again. That has been put to bed. You know that Pete Carroll is a very, very happy man about that. So on that note, thanks for watching our show. Be sure to like, subscribe to the channel, share it with your friends. Again, join the channel at the Heisman tier or the National Champion tier to get bonus cuts, and vocfb.com/shop. Get a USC cap, a USC shirt. They help the channel here at the Voice of College Football. We'll be with you next Tuesday, same bat time, same bat channel, 10 p.m. in the East, 7 p.m. in LA and the rest of the West. For Crashlet Collier and Nolan Ezit, this is Matt Zemek. Thanks for watching and listening to the USC channel, USC Primetime Live, here at the Voice of College Football, presented by FanDuel. We'll see you next week.